Welcome to Twilight Fables, where we explore the dark, twisted corners of familiar fairy tales, and today we retell the story of Goldilocks like you've never heard it before. In this version, Goldilocks herself is not what she seems, and the cottage in the woods hides a secret that will unravel 3 things she knows about herself. The forest lay quiet that morning, a stillness that pressed against the skin like a warning. Mist clung to the underbrush and twisted around the gnarled trunks of the trees, curling upward like smoke from a fire that had long since died. Sunlight leaked through in thin golden blades, illuminating motes of dust that hung suspended in the air. Somewhere deep within the forest, birds stirred, though the forest seemed too thick, too dense, for anything alive to move freely. Goldilocks walked slowly, her steps soft against the damp carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. Her hair gleamed like spun gold, and in the light, her face appeared impossibly delicate, porcelain-like, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a coiled energy beneath her calm exterior, as though each step carried the weight of memory she could not fully recall. It was not a normal day for wandering in the forest. She knew that somewhere, just beyond the mist, something watched, something patient, something that waited for mistakes to be made. The cottage appeared suddenly, almost as if the forest had grown it in a single night. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the wooden walls seemed impossibly small, quaint and unassuming. Goldilocks paused at the edge of the clearing, instinctively wary. Something about the place felt off, a subtle discord beneath the sweet, homely appearance. The door was slightly ajar, creaking with the rhythm of a slow sigh. Goldilocks's chest tightened. She knew she should leave, that some part of her, distant, unformed, recognized danger, yet curiosity, or perhaps something older and more insistent, compelled her forward. She stepped inside. The interior was warm, the smell of wood smoke and porridge heavy in the air. 3 bowls sat upon the table, each with porridge still steaming slightly. Chairs of varying sizes were arranged haphazardly, as if left in a hurry. On the floor, a scattering of straw and animal fur suggested the recent presence of creatures larger than any human she had seen. Goldilocks' eyes travelled over the room, landing on the smallest chair first. She hesitated, then lowered herself into it. It was too cold, too hard, and she rose quickly, brushing invisible dust from her skirts. Next, the middle chair, too firm, uncomfortable. Finally, the largest chair beckoned. She sank into it, expecting comfort, and immediately felt it cradle her like a lover she had never known. A shiver ran down her spine. Something in the chair felt familiar, almost like it remembered her. She moved to the table, tasting each bowl of porridge in turn. The first was too hot, scalding her tongue. The second was too cold, biting her lips with icy resistance. The third, smooth, warm, just right, made her pause. As she ate, a memory flared, soft fur brushing against her cheek, a deep rumble vibrating through her bones, a feeling of safety she couldn't name. Goldilocks froze mid-bite, her hand trembled slightly as she realized the sensation was wrong. Not her memory, but someone else's. A sound, a soft shuffle, echoed from upstairs. Her heart jumped. She had thought the cottage empty. The sound grew louder, measured. Footsteps, careful but deliberate, moving across the floorboards above. Goldilocks' mind raced. She could flee, but a part of her hesitated. There was something she needed to see, to understand, even if it terrified her. Creeping toward the staircase, she listened. A voice, soft and musical, drifted down from the landing. "Ah, my little one, how you've grown." Goldilocks froze. The words felt like a cold finger tracing her spine. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, echoing in places that had no memory. And then the realization struck. She had been here before, not as a visitor, not as a human. The staircase creaked beneath her weight, and as she ascended, fragments of memory assaulted her. The room above was not a bedroom, as she had assumed, but a place of confinement, a crib, small and lined with soft straw, occupied the centre. The smallest bear, once human, she realized, stood within, eyes wide staring. The child, or was it a boy, was human in appearance, yet something in the curve of the shoulders, the tension in the limbs, betrayed an unnatural transformation. It looked at her, recognition flickering like a candle flame in its gaze. Goldilocks stumbled backward. You're not." Her voice failed, choked by the weight of the revelation. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, thin, and impossibly still. The woman, no, the witch, stood framed in the doorway. Hair like dried straw fell over a cloak stitched of patchwork fur. Eyes glinted sharp as shards of glass. Her hands, pale and tipped with nails like claws, rested lightly at her sides. "Curious," the witch said softly. "You've returned, or perhaps you never left." Goldilocks' chest tightened. The room spun. She could feel the chair beneath her, the warmth of the porridge, the presence of the child, all converging into a single terrible truth. She was not who she thought she was, and the child, once human, now bear, was no ordinary boy. The witch moved closer, steps silent as shadows. "Once you were mine," she said. "A small cub, helpless, soft-furred, and he was mine too. But the bargain is cruel, is it not? One can return, one must be lost." Goldilocks felt a hollow ache, a splitting pain in her chest. The memories she had tried to bury surfaced violently, being a cub, stolen from warmth, transformed into something not quite herself, and the boy, human, innocent, taken, reshaped, trapped. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It isn't fair. We can't." The witch smiled, a cruel, thin smile. "Fairness has nothing to do with it. Choices do, and you must choose before the forest chooses for you." From somewhere beyond the cottage, the wind picked up. It rattled the windows, stirred the red leaves of distant trees. Goldilocks felt it pressing against her, whispering, urging. She looked at the boy, no, the smallest bear, whose eyes reflected a past neither of them fully understood. He clung to the edge of the crib, uncertain, fearful, yet strangely calm, as if the forest itself had tempered his reaction. The witch's shadow lengthened, spilling across the floor, merging with Goldilocks' reflection. Her claws twitched. Time is short. Midnight approaches. Choose, or everything you love will vanish. Goldilocks' heart raced. She looked at the child, then back at the witch. Panic and confusion collided, burning hotter than any flame. Memories of fur and laughter, of stolen mornings and unremembered warmth surged within her. She realized the impossible. If she tried to keep both would be lost. The first step of the impossible choice pressed down on her mind like a weight. The forest outside the cottage seemed to press closer, bending light and shadow. She could feel the pull of magic, the unseen threads the witch had woven around them both. Her claws, or had they been human hands, dug into the floor. She shivered, trembling in a mixture of fear and rage. "There has to be another way," she whispered to herself, almost silently. "There has to be." The smallest bear stepped closer, gaze fixed on her. Its voice, soft but clear, carried an edge of urgency. "We can't hide forever. We tried, and now it will force the choice." Goldilocks swallowed, chest tight, and felt the first true tremor of fear. The forest, the witch, and the burning ache of memory were converging. There was no escape. Outside, the morning mist thickened, curling through the trees like tendrils of smoke. Sunlight fell in golden spears, catching on drops of dew and the edges of the leaves. The cottage remained a quiet, deceptive haven. Inside, Goldilocks and the smallest bear stood frozen, suspended in the tension between past and present, bear and human, choice and consequence. The witch's voice drifted through the room once more, soft and relentless. "Choose before the moon reaches its apex, or lose them both." Goldilocks' gaze fell on the child. She had been a cub, she realized. She had been stolen. She had been transformed. And now the impossible choice hung in the air like a blade over their heads. The forest waited, the clock of fate ticked, and Goldilocks' world, the one she had thought she knew, began to unravel. The witch had retreated to the doorway, her silhouette still sharp against the dim morning light. She did not speak again, but Goldilocks felt her presence in the very air, in the shadows that slithered along the walls, and in the subtle sway of the furniture, as though the cottage itself had become an extension of her will. Goldilocks' mind raced, the memories of her time as a cub pressed forward with relentless insistence. The warmth of a mother's fur, the smell of pine sap in a forest she had not yet learned to recognize, the sound of paws moving softly across the earth. She could almost feel herself shrinking into that small form, her claws curling into the straw under the crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had long been suppressed. Beside her, the smallest bear shivered, a tremor running along its slender frame. "We can't stay here," it murmured. "She will come back. She always comes back." Goldilocks nodded, though the thought of moving deeper into the forest, away from the only place that had ever offered a sense of familiarity, filled her with unease. "Then where do we go?" she whispered. If we move, will it be safe?" The bear's gaze was steady, unblinking. "Safe," it repeated, and the word hung in the air, strange and hollow. There is no safety, only choices, only the illusion of control. The cottage door creaked suddenly, a sound that made both of them jump, but no one entered. The forest seemed to shift outside, its shadows bending and curling as if alive, and the air grew heavier, charged with an almost tactile sense of dread. Goldilocks swallowed hard. She realized with a cold clarity that the forest was no longer just a place of trees and leaves. It was part of the witch's spell, a living extension of her magic, bending reality to her will. Every tree, every branch, every leaf seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat, and that heartbeat resonated with the memories Goldilocks could not escape. The smallest bear stepped closer to her, brushing a trembling paw against her arm. "I remember more now," it said softly. "I remember before the change, the sun on my face, the sound of wind through the meadow, and then her voice, her taking. You," it faltered, shuddering. "You too." Goldilocks' chest tightened. She pressed a hand to her throat, trying to steady herself, but the memories surged relentlessly. She saw herself as a cub, small and helpless, and then glimpses of the boy who had become the smallest bear. He had been human, vulnerable, and he had been stolen and transformed. The witch's laughter drifted through the cottage suddenly, soft and malicious. It carried no warmth, only the cold precision of control. Goldilocks flinched, and the smallest bear hissed low in its throat, the sound almost human in its despair. "They are testing us," the bear said. "They always test us. The forest, the magic, the witch. It all pushes toward the same end. Goldilocks shook her head. I don't understand. Why? Why did she take us? Why make me this? The bear's ears twitched. Because she can. Because she enjoys the undoing of natural order. You were a cub. I was a boy. And now we are caught in a web she spun long before we were born. She delights in the impossibility of your choices. The words sank into Goldilocks' mind like stones into water, rippling outward, filling every crevice with cold dread. The impossible truth pressed upon her. She had been stolen, reshaped, and placed here to serve as part of a cruel experiment in choice and consequence. Goldilocks moved toward the window, staring out at the forest. The mist hung low, thick and unyielding, curling around the base of the trees like grasping hands. The sunlight barely penetrated, leaving the forest in a state of perpetual twilight. Shapes flickered in the mist, shadows that might have been animals, might have been human, or might have been something else entirely. The smallest bear's voice drew her back. We cannot linger here, it said. If she returns, if the forest itself bends fully to her will, we will be caught, and there will be no undoing. Goldilocks nodded, a shiver running through her. She realized that the cottage, the porridge, the chairs, they had all been a trap, a lure, a way to anchor her in a moment she could not truly inhabit. She had to leave. She had to move forward into the forest that pulsed with magic and memory, even though every instinct screamed that it would be far worse than the cottage had ever been. They descended the stairs cautiously, each step echoing in the hollow space of the cottage. Goldilocks' hand brushed against the wall, feeling the grain of the wood and the memory of small claws, once her own, pricked at the edges of her consciousness. She realized she was trembling, not from cold, not from fear alone, but from the awakening of something deep inside, a memory of herself as she had truly been, a small bear cub lost in the forest. The smallest bear padded ahead, sniffing the air, ears twitching. There is a place, it said softly, a place the witch cannot touch, not yet, but it is not without danger. Goldilocks followed, her mind racing. Where? Where is it? The bear stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at her with eyes that carried both knowledge and grief. Through the chest, it said. The chest in the cellar. It will take us somewhere she cannot reach. But once we go, there is no turning back. You must understand. It is a choice between illusion and truth, between staying in her control or stepping into the unknown. The cellar door creaked open as they approached, the lantern inside casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Shelves lined with jars of herbs and roots glimmered faintly in the dim light. At the far corner stood a wooden chest, bound in iron, its surface scarred with age and faint claw marks. Goldilocks stepped forward, heart hammering. The air around the chest seemed to vibrate, humming with latent energy. She felt the pull of magic, subtle yet insistent, urging her forward, while whispering warnings she could barely comprehend. The smallest bear nudged her gently. "It is the only way," it said. "If we hesitate, she will find us, and if she finds us, we will not survive intact. She will undo us completely." Goldilocks' fingers trembled as she pressed against the chest surface. The wood was warm beneath her palm, almost alive. She could feel the pulse of the forest, the echoes of her cub self, and the boy who had become the smallest bear, all converging in a single point of potential. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. The hinges groaned, but the chest opened smoothly, revealing a darkness that seemed to stretch farther than the confines of the cottage. A wave of heat rolled from within, dry and sharp, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and something more ancient, more alive. Goldilocks peered inside. The darkness shifted, revealing shapes that defied reason. Trees rose from within, blackened and twisted, their leaves red as coals, flickering as if lit by some internal fire. The ground pulsed beneath her eyes, not earth, but something like living embers, and in the centre, she thought she saw a figure, the boy, the smallest bear, standing, waiting, watching. Her chest tightened, a hollow ache stretching through her. "It's him," she whispered. The bear beside her nodded slowly. "Yes, he waits, but understand this. Once we step inside, the forest will demand a choice, and the choice may consume us both." Goldilocks' hands trembled as she considered the impossible. She could not leave the boy behind. She could not turn back to the cottage, which had always been a trap. Yet stepping into the chest, the forest beyond, felt like stepping into the maw of inevitability. Every instinct screamed danger. Every memory pressed against her mind. The witch's voice echoed faintly, carried from somewhere far above, or perhaps from inside her own head. Choose, or lose everything. Goldilocks swallowed, tears pricking her eyes. The boy bear shifted closer, small paw brushing against her hand. "We go together," he whispered, "or we are lost." The moment stretched, suspended between fear and determination, between memory and transformation, until Goldilocks felt a resolve forming inside her, a spark of defiance. She nodded. "Together," she said. With that, they stepped into the chest. The darkness enveloped them, and the air changed immediately. Heat pressed against their skin. Light shimmered like liquid fire, and the ground pulsed beneath their feet with a rhythm that matched their own heartbeats. The burning forest inside the chest was alive, aware, and filled with memories too powerful to contain. Goldilocks felt herself shifting, fur brushing against skin, claws flexing where hands had been, senses sharpening and overwhelming her mind. The boy beside her, human and bear intertwined, looked around, eyes wide with recognition and fear. The forest waited, patient and relentless, and the impossible choice hovered over them, a blade poised between survival and obliteration. The darkness of the chest shifted and swirled around Goldilocks and the smallest bear, stretching outward until the boundaries of the space seemed meaningless. There was no floor beneath their feet, no ceiling above, only the sensation of movement through a liquid that pressed against their bodies, warm and heavy, as if the very air had weight and intent. Goldilocks' heart raced. Claws, or were they hands, curling into the sides of the chest, and she felt a pull deep inside her chest, as if the forest itself had reached in to claim her. She glanced at the smallest bear. His eyes reflected the pulsing darkness, wide with recognition, fear, and an unspoken understanding of what lay ahead. Though his body bore the form of a bear, the human inside, the boy he once had been, shone faintly in his gaze. He shifted, pressing closer, and whispered, "Stay with me, whatever comes, stay with me." Goldilocks nodded, but words felt insufficient. The forest, alive and sentient within this shifting realm, responded to the tension between them. Branches of blackened trees stretched impossibly, twisting into shapes that resembled claws and fingers, reaching for the pair as they moved forward. The red leaves flickered like embers, spiraling through the air, striking the barest sense of skin and leaving a tingling heat that penetrated bone. As they navigated the twisting paths, memories surged violently. Goldilocks felt herself slipping back into her cub form, small and helpless, rolling in straw and fur that smelled of earth and warmth. The boy, the smallest bear, shifted beside her, and fragments of his past human life pressed forward, running through sunlit fields, laughing with freedom, feeling the wind against his face. Each memory collided with the present, making the forest feel more oppressive, more alive, as if the land itself were weaving them into its narrative, reshaping who they were with every step. The path widened suddenly, revealing a clearing that seemed to pulse with its own life. The ground was no longer solid, but resembled blackened embers, frozen mid-flame, flickering and shifting as if beneath a surface of molten glass. Trees curved inward, forming a dome overhead, their red leaves creating a canopy that refracted light in disorienting, dizzying patterns. The smallest bear froze. "This is it," he murmured, "the heart of the forest, where the choice is forced, where the forest decides who remains and who vanishes." Goldilocks felt a cold wave of terror roll through her chest. She had known, in the recesses of memory and instinct, that this moment would come. The ache in her chest, a mixture of longing and fear, tightened as if demanding a decision she did not yet know how to make. From the centre of the clearing, a figure began to emerge, or perhaps it had been there all along, merely invisible until now. The light shifted and the form coalesced, tall, slender, impossibly still. The witch. Her hair shimmered like dead straw, and her eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating brilliance. Hands tipped with nails, like shards of obsidian, hovered at her sides, and the very air around her seemed to bend and twist in response to her presence. "Ah," she said, voice lilting, a soft melody of cruelty. "You have come willingly, though I suspect not fully understanding the consequences. The forest waits, and the choice approaches. Do you understand, little cub?" Goldilocks swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her past and present pressing upon her. I don't want to choose," she said. "I don't want either of us to." The witch's smile widened, sharp and thin. "And yet, you must. The forest will not allow indecision. It will not be fooled by your hesitation. One path, one life, and one must be relinquished." The smallest bear growled softly, a sound that was both human and animal, resonating in the clearing. "We tried to escape, but there is no escape. She built this world around us. She knows our every thought, our every fear. If we do not act, it will act for us." The forest itself seemed to respond. Branches twisted upward and inward, creating a barrier of jagged black wood and flickering red leaves. The ground shifted under their feet, undulating like a living, breathing organism. The clearing contracted, compressing around them, until it felt impossible to move without brushing against the oppressive, pulsing life of the forest. Goldilocks' claws dug into the surface, and she felt herself stretching, morphing between the forms she had known, cub and girl, bear and human. Her mind spun, filled with memories and sensations that were not entirely her own. She remembered warmth, fur, running through sunlit fields, laughter, porridge, chairs, and the small child's voice whispering to her in the night. The ache in her chest intensified, a hollow pressure that threatened to split her from inside. The smallest bear leaned close, pressing a trembling paw to her arm. "We must decide," he whispered. "We cannot remain here. The forest will choose, and it will not be kind." The witch stepped closer, her movements fluid and unnervingly silent. The shadows of the trees stretched and merged with her form, making it impossible to distinguish where she ended and the forest began. "Time is short," she said, voice echoing as if carried from a great distance. "Decide, little cub, before the moon reaches its apex, before the choice is taken from your trembling paws." Goldilocks' mind raced. She could not abandon the boy, the smallest bear, but she could not bear the thought of losing herself either. The impossible nature of their predicament pressed down on her like a stone, heavy and unyielding. Every instinct, every memory demanded a choice she did not know how to make. The smallest bear's voice trembled, barely audible. If we attempt to keep both, the forest will claim us. And then his voice broke, a growl mingling with the sound of human sobs. Then neither of us will remain. Goldilocks stared at him, heart hammering. I cannot choose, she whispered. We can't. Not one, not the other. A sudden wind swept through the clearing, carrying the scent of smoke and pine and something older, darker. The red leaves twisted violently, striking Goldilocks' face, brushing against her fur and skin. She tried to shield her eyes, but the forest's pulse pressed against her, insistent, unrelenting. Shadows began to shift along the ground, coalescing into forms she could not immediately recognize. The forest seemed alive with the memories of all those it had claimed, all those who had faced the impossible choice before her. Their whispers echoed faintly, carried on the wind. Choose, choose, or be unmade. Goldilocks shivered. The ache in her chest now felt like fire, and she clutched at her ribs, trying to steady herself. The boy beside her did the same, paw pressing to his chest, as if to contain the same impossible burden. The witch's voice cut through the cacophony. One life, one soul. The forest will not be cheated by sentiment. Decide or surrender to its judgment. Goldilocks' eyes darted to the smallest bear. His face was a mixture of fear, understanding, and a fleeting hope that they could survive the ordeal together. She could see the traces of the boy he had been, human and innocent, layered over the bear he had become. And a sudden, desperate longing surged within her. She wanted to protect him, to hold him close, to defy the forest itself. But the knowledge was unbearable. The forest's magic was absolute. The witch's power, woven into the very air, would not allow both of them to escape intact. She felt it in her bones, in the trembling of her claws and hands, in the pressure of the air against her chest. The forest pulsed again, closing in, tightening, a living entity demanding resolution. Every branch, every ember red leaf, every shadow seemed to press toward the inevitable. Goldilocks took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She could not run, she could not hide. The choice, impossible, cruel, inevitable, loomed over them like a blade, suspended by invisible threads. She glanced at the smallest bear once more. I can't choose, she said, voice shaking. We both must survive. There has to be a way. The bear shook its head slowly, eyes wide with sorrow. There is no way, not for both of us. If we attempt it, the forest will take everything. Goldilocks' chest tightened further. Her claws scraped the ground instinctively, drawing tiny red streaks that seemed to glow in the ambient light. She felt herself morphing again, the cub inside her writhing, the girl she had been clinging to consciousness, trembling. The forest's pulse matched the rhythm of her heartbeat, relentless, insistent. The witch watched silently, a smile playing across her lips as the shadows of the clearing lengthened and twisted. "Time has almost run out," she said softly. "Decide or lose all you hold dear." The forest pressed closer around them, the clearing with its flickering red leaves and blackened trees seemed to contract and expand as if breathing every heartbeat of Goldilocks, and the smallest bear echoed in the hollow space, a rhythm the forest itself had claimed. The chest they had entered had long since vanished behind them, leaving them suspended within a liminal space that defied logic or gravity. Shadows twisted and danced along the jagged trees, shapes forming that resembled figures caught between animal and human. Goldilocks took a cautious step forward, her claws or hands digging into the dark ground beneath her. Every step sent vibrations through the forest floor, a subtle hum of life and memory, as if the land itself had absorbed centuries of stolen innocence. She felt it tug at her chest, pressing against the small, helpless cub inside her, and the girl she had believed herself to be. The pressure was almost unbearable, a weight pressing down on her soul. Beside her, the smallest bear shifted nervously, its eyes flicked between the twisting shadows, and Goldilocks wide and alert. "This is no ordinary forest," it murmured. "It knows us. It knows every memory, every fear, every choice we've made. It is alive, and it judges us at every moment." Goldilocks nodded, though she felt numb, frozen under the weight of realization. The forest was not just a place. They were inside a living, breathing trap. Every tree, every flickering leaf, every gust of wind was part of a design meant to force them to confront themselves, their past, and the impossible choice that awaited. She remembered the cottage, the porridge, the chairs, and the sense of safety that had always been an illusion. Her stomach churned at the memory, and she pressed a trembling hand to her chest. We cannot leave each other," she whispered, voice breaking. "But if the forest decides, it will take one of us, or both." The smallest bear tilted its head, ears flicking nervously. "Then we must understand it first," it said. "The forest does not act without reason. It is cruel, yes, but it is bound by its own rules. We must find the heart of this place, the centre, before it makes the choice for us." Goldilocks swallowed hard. The heart of the forest, somewhere deep within this living nightmare, lay the fulcrum of power, the locus where the impossible choice would be forced. To reach it would mean venturing further into the unknown, deeper into a world that defied all logic and sense. They moved cautiously, the forest's pulse growing stronger with every step. The red leaves flickered and shimmered, brushing against their faces and limbs. Each touch burned lightly, a sensation that was neither entirely pain nor entirely pleasure, but something older and stranger, searing into memory. Branches arched overhead, twisting in impossible angles, forming tunnels and cages of living wood. The smallest bear sniffed the air, its body tensing. "We are being guided," it said softly. "The forest is showing us the path, but it is also watching. Every misstep will be remembered, every hesitation punished." Goldilocks shivered. She felt the pull of her cub self, the small, helpless creature who had been stolen and transformed. She felt the pull of her human self, the girl who had wandered into the cottage, unaware of the truth of her existence. Both forms struggled for dominance within her mind, and the forest's pulse resonated with the tension, making the air vibrate and hum. They reached a clearing that was larger than any they had seen before. The ground glimmered like molten glass, black and red, pulsating with heat and energy. Trees twisted into arches overhead, their branches forming a dome that seemed to trap them in a living cage. Shadows moved along the edges of the clearing, flickering in and out of existence, forming shapes that resembled long-lost memories, fleeting fears, and impossible desires. At the centre of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk wide and gnarled, blackened with age and fire. Its roots twisted and coiled across the ground like serpents, and its branches reached toward the sky, disappearing into the swirling red mist above. The smallest bear stepped forward, paw trembling slightly. "There," it said, "the heart of the forest, the place where the choice will be made, where the impossible will be forced." Goldilocks felt her chest tighten, a hollow ache spreading through her body. She knew instinctively that the forest would not allow both of them to leave. She could feel the threads of magic weaving around them, invisible but palpable, pulling at her very soul. As they approached the massive tree, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The pulsating energy intensified, and the shadows around them coalesced into forms that resembled those they had loved, lost, or feared. Goldilocks saw the faint outline of her cub self running through a sunlit forest, chased by the witch's voice. She saw the boy who had become the smallest bear, laughing in fields of gold before he was stolen and transformed. Every memory pressed against her consciousness, a reminder of what they had been and what they were at risk of losing. The smallest bear growled softly, the sound both human and animal. "The forest is judging us," it said. "Every step, every thought, every hesitation, it knows, and it will decide who remains and who disappears." Goldilocks swallowed hard. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest, a sensation that was almost physical, as if the forest itself were squeezing her heart. I don't want to lose him," she whispered. "I can't." The bear pressed closer, its warmth a grounding presence. "I don't want to be lost either," it murmured, "but we must be ready. The choice is coming, and it will not be fair." From the canopy above, the witch's voice drifted down, soft and melodic, yet cutting through the tension like a blade. "Decide, little cub," she said. "Decide before the forest chooses for you. One must remain, one must be relinquished. The threads of fate will not be ignored." Goldilocks shivered. She had thought they might find a way to escape, a loophole, some trick to preserve them both. But the forest's pulse, the red leaves swirling around them, and the witch's voice made it clear there was no escape, only the impossible choice. The smallest bear pressed a paw to her hand. "Whatever happens," it whispered, "we face it together until the end." Goldilocks nodded, feeling the tension coiling tighter around her chest. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, the forest holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Branches twisted, leaves flickered, and shadows danced across the ground, forming shapes that defied reason, visions of what could be lost, echoes of what had already been stolen. The massive tree at the centre of the clearing pulsed with a dark, vibrant energy. Its branches arched overhead, dripping with flickering red leaves that burned with an inner fire. The roots writhed across the ground, reaching toward them as if sensing their fear and hesitation. Goldilocks could feel the threads of magic wrapping around her, tugging at her very soul, demanding a choice she was not ready to make. The smallest bear stepped forward, nose to the ground, ears twitching. "The forest will force the decision soon," it murmured. "We must act before it decides for us. One path, one life, that is all it allows." Goldilocks felt tears prick at her eyes. She could not imagine losing him, the boy, the bear, the creature she had come to care for. Yet she knew, deep down, that trying to keep them both might destroy them entirely. The weight of the impossible choice pressed down on her like a physical force, threatening to crush her spirit. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, pine, and something older, darker, beyond comprehension. Shadows shifted along the ground, forming shapes of memory, fear, and desire, reminding Goldilocks of all that had been stolen, all that hung in the balance. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the pulse of life, magic, and memory intertwining, and realized the forest was alive, not just a setting, but a participant, a judge, and an executioner. The witch's voice echoed again, soft, melodic, and cruel. "Decide, little cub," she said. "Decide or surrender all. The forest will not be fooled by sentiment, and it will not be patient for long. Choose before the moon reaches its apex." Goldilocks' claws dug into the ground. Her mind raced, trying to find a solution, a loophole, a way to defy fate, But the forest's pulse, the witch's presence, and the weight of memory pressed relentlessly. The smallest bear's paw touched hers, grounding her, reminding her of the bond they shared. Even in the face of the impossible, they stood together at the heart of the forest, suspended between memory and reality, bear and human, choice and consequence. The impossible decision loomed over them, a blade suspended by threads of magic, memory and time. And as the red leaves swirled violently around them, Goldilocks understood the truth. There was no way to preserve both, and yet she could not bear to lose either. The forest waited, the witch watched, and the moment of reckoning drew near. The forest thrummed with a low, resonant pulse, vibrating through the ground and up into Goldilocks' bones. Every leaf, every shadow, every flickering ember of red light seemed to respond to their presence, growing tense, impatient, as if aware that the final decision, the impossible choice, was imminent. Goldilocks felt herself teetering on the edge of panic, the ache in her chest coiling tighter, constricting like a living thing. The smallest bear beside her mirrored the tension, ears twitching, muscles rigid, its form poised between boy and bear, human and animal. They moved closer to the massive tree at the centre of the clearing, the heart of the forest. Its blackened trunk, gnarled and twisted, pulsed with an energy that seemed to synchronize with their own heartbeats. Red leaves shimmered in a light that came from nowhere, casting shapes across the ground that resembled memories, fears, and possible futures. Goldilocks' mind was flooded with recollections. The warmth of her cub mother, the smell of pine, the cottage with its porridge and chairs, the soft voice of the boy before he became the smallest bear. The forest had become more than a place. It was alive, aware, and merciless in its demands. Each step forward pressed upon them with a force that was almost physical. Goldilocks could feel herself morphing, small bear and human girl, intertwining in thought, body, and memory, as if the forest were attempting to reforge them entirely. The smallest bear's voice trembled as it spoke. This is the centre, the place where the forest will force the choice. One life, one existence, not both. Its paw brushed against Goldilocks' hand, a grounding touch, a reminder of shared history, shared fear, shared love. We must be ready. The forest will not wait. Goldilocks swallowed hard. Her mind raced. How could she choose? How could she possibly relinquish the boy she had come to trust, care for, and understand? And yet, trying to hold on to both risked everything. They might be consumed entirely by the forest's will, obliterated in its judgment. She felt the cub inside her stirring, claws curling, instincts sharpening, reminding her of a life she could almost feel slipping through the cracks of time. The wind stirred around them, carrying whispers that were half memories, half magic. Choose, choose, or lose all. The words were neither malevolent nor kind. They were inevitable, an echo of the forest itself. Goldilocks pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the pulse of life, memory, and magic intertwining. She looked at the smallest bear, and the weight of impossible love, responsibility, and fear pressed down upon her. Suddenly, the massive tree quivered, roots coiling like serpents, and branches arching as if to block escape. A deep hum emanated from its core, resonating in their bones, vibrating through the air, forcing a clarity that was as painful as it was necessary. Goldilocks realized the forest would not wait. They had to act, even if the act itself was doomed. "I can't choose," she whispered. Her voice shook, echoing through the pulsating clearing. I can't leave you. Not now. Not ever." The smallest bear's ears flattened. "I know," it said softly, "and I cannot leave you either. But the forest, it will decide if we hesitate." A gust of wind, hot and sharp, blew through the clearing. The red leaves danced violently, striking them, brushing against their fur and skin, leaving tingling marks that burned like embers. Goldilocks felt her human self and cub self pushing and pulling inside her, instincts and memories colliding. The boy beside her, the smallest bear, trembled as well, human fear interlacing with animal instinct. The form he had become straining against the impossible choice. The witch's voice cut through the chaos, calm and melodic, yet sharper than any blade. "Decide, little cub," she said. "One must remain. One must be relinquished. The threads of fate will not tolerate hesitation. The forest will take what it deems necessary." Goldilocks flinched at the sound, the realization striking her like lightning. The witch was not merely observing. She had orchestrated this entire ordeal. The cottage, the transformation, the lure into the forest. It had all led to this moment, and now, at the heart of the forest, the impossible choice pressed upon them like a living weight. The smallest bear growled low in its throat, a sound both human and animal, a vibration that resonated with the forest itself. "We cannot try to keep both," it whispered. "The forest will consume us entirely. We must make a choice." Goldilocks' mind spun. She shook her head violently. "No, there has to be another way. There must be." She felt her claws dig into the molten black ground beneath them, scratching the surface, leaving faint, glowing streaks. The forest pulsed in response, as if mocking her struggle. The tree quivered violently. Shadows along its trunk began to take form, coalescing into shapes that resembled those they had loved, feared, or lost. Goldilocks saw fleeting visions, herself as a cub rolling in straw, the boy before he became the smallest bear, laughing in fields of gold, the witch's twisted silhouette, and the cottage with its small, fragile objects meant to deceive. Every memory pressed against her, demanding recognition, demanding choice. "We can't hesitate," the smallest bear said again, pressing close. Its warmth grounded her, a tether in the swirling chaos. "But we don't have to choose in the way they expect." Goldilocks' brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The forest judges based on attachment," it whispered, "on fear, on the desire to cling. But what if we release both, willingly?" Its eyes flicked to hers, wide with uncertainty. "Perhaps then we escape the judgment, or perhaps..." Its voice trailed off into a low growl, blending with the forest's hum. Goldilocks stared at the boy bear, understanding the gravity of the thought. To release both willingly would be to confront the impossibility of the situation, to challenge the forest's expectation, to defy the witch herself. But the risk was clear. They might lose everything entirely. A sudden wave of heat surged from the massive tree, and the ground trembled beneath them. Red leaves spun violently in the air, striking them and leaving burns that tingled painfully. Goldilocks clutched the smallest bear's paw tightly. They had only moments left. The threads of magic, fate, and forest pulse were converging, drawing toward the climax of inevitability. The witch's voice echoed, sharper, urgent. "Decide now. One must remain, or all will be lost." Goldilocks' chest ached. She looked at the boy, the smallest bear, and saw the reflection of her own fear, longing, and impossible love mirrored in his eyes. She understood then. There was no safe choice, no resolution that preserved all. They could cling and be consumed, or they could surrender, and perhaps, in that act of defiance, find a path beyond the forest's control. Her claws flexed, her human hands trembling, her cub instincts roaring to the surface. The smallest bear pressed close, noses brushing, fur intermingling with skin. "Together?" it whispered. Goldilocks nodded, swallowing the panic that threatened to overtake her. "Together," she said. "No matter what comes, we face it together." A wave of black wind swept the clearing, carrying embers and red leaves. The massive tree pulsed violently, and the shadows shifted with greater intensity, coalescing into the forms of memory and judgment. Goldilocks felt herself stretching, twisting between forms, between instincts, between past and present. The smallest bear mirrored her movements, human and animal entwined, breath ragged, ears flattened against the rush of inevitability. They released their grip on the idea of possession. They released the desire to hold, to choose, to control. The forest reacted violently at first, thrashing shadows, whipping branches, burning embers, spiraling into the air. And then, A pause, the clearing stilled, the massive tree's pulse slowed, red leaves hung frozen in mid-air, and the shadows retreated into the darkness of memory. Goldilocks and the smallest bear felt themselves lifted, the molten ground shifting beneath them, the impossible choice unresolved yet suspended. The witch's voice, soft now, carried a note of irritation and curiosity. Interesting, she murmured. Defiance. In the face of inevitability, it is rare, fascinating. Goldilocks and the smallest bear pressed close, bodies trembling, intertwined. They had not chosen the forest's terms, but they had acted together, releasing both themselves and each other from the constriction of expectation. The heart of the forest pulsed, aware yet hesitant, as if it could not fully grasp this act of unity. For a fleeting moment, they were free, not entirely, not yet, but suspended between consequence and survival, between forest and magic, between fear and hope. They had not been consumed, but they had not yet escaped. Goldilocks looked at the smallest bear, eyes wide and glistening. We did it, she whispered, though uncertainty lingered. We survived together. The smallest bear nodded, ears flicking nervously. For now, it said, but the forest remembers, the witch remembers, and what comes next may be worse than this. Goldilocks swallowed, pressing closer. She felt the pulse of magic, memory, and fear around them, knowing that their journey was far from over. But for this moment, this fragile, terrifying, beautiful moment, they had faced the impossible together. The forest remained tense, alive with a watchful energy that pressed against Goldilocks and the smallest bear, though they had survived the first wave of judgment by refusing to choose between each other. The air around them pulsed with the forest's awareness, the witch's presence, and an underlying sense that the final reckoning was still to come. The red leaves swirled, brushing against their fur and skin, leaving tingling sensations that burned with memory and magic, and the shadows moved along the edges of the clearing like living, patient predators. Goldilocks pressed close to the smallest bear. They had survived, yes, but only momentarily. The forest's pulse was insistent, constant, like a heartbeat inside the ground itself. Do you feel it? She asked softly, voice trembling. It hasn't stopped. It's still judging us, still pressing. The bear nodded, ears flicking, body tense. Yes, the first choice only delayed the inevitable. The forest does not forgive defiance forever. It merely recalibrates. We have temporarily survived, but the next wave may be worse. Goldilocks shivered. And the witch, she's still here. From somewhere deep within the canopy, the witch's voice drifted, melodic and thinly veiled with amusement. Clever little creatures, she said, refusing the choice, defying the rules. But do not mistake this momentary reprieve for victory. The forest is patient, and I am patient. What you escaped once, you will face again, and when the threads tighten, you will have no choice but to surrender what the forest demands. Goldilocks felt a chill creep down her spine. Her instincts screamed, claws flexing and retracting, the cub inside her trembling. With remembered fear, she glanced at the smallest bear, whose face mirrored her own apprehension. The bond between them, strong and unyielding, had been their lifeline, but the forest's magic, alive, sentient, and inexorably cruel, was far from defeated. The heart of the forest, it's alive, the bear said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. It adapts, it learns, it tests, and it always finds a way to take what it wants. One day, it will not be content with hesitation. It will not allow both of us to escape again. Goldilocks pressed her forehead to the bear's shoulder, shivering. Then what do we do? She whispered. Do we keep running? Keep hiding? We can't just stay here forever. The smallest bear shook its head slowly. No, there is no hiding. The forest does not forget, and we cannot run indefinitely. We must prepare for the moment it decides again, and when it does, we must be ready to face it together, or it will claim both of us. The clearing seemed to contract around them as the forest's pulse intensified. The red leaves, the twisting shadows, and the blackened trees pressed closer, a subtle warning that time was not on their side. Goldilocks' claws scraped against the molten-like ground, sparks flaring with each movement. She felt her form shifting constantly, cub, human, bear, an endless negotiation with the forest itself. Memories surged unbidden, the small porridge bowls, the chairs, the human world she had been thrust into, and the boy who had become the smallest bear, all collided in her mind. The forest fed on these memories, drawing them into its pulse, bending them into lessons and warnings. The smallest bear's voice was low and steady, though tremors of fear ran beneath it. It is learning, and so must we. It will try to divide us, to test our bond, to exploit fear, and when that moment comes, we must remain united. Only together do we stand a chance. Goldilocks nodded, though the tremor in her body betrayed her, the ache in her chest, the twisting pulse of the forest, and the witch's ever-present gaze created a pressure that was almost unbearable. She pressed her paw into the molten ground, leaving faint, glowing scratches, and focused on the smallest bear. They were bound together now by choice and necessity, and the forest could sense that bond. Hours, or perhaps days, passed. Time had become meaningless in the forest's heart. The red leaves flickered like embers, the shadows whispered, and the massive tree loomed silently, a patient sentinel that seemed to absorb every heartbeat, every memory, every thought. Goldilocks, and the smallest bear moved cautiously, learning to navigate the shifting terrain, testing its patterns, feeling the pulse of the forest as it responded to their movements. They discovered that by moving in tandem, by aligning their thoughts and instincts, they could anticipate some of the forest shifts. Paths that would have closed off for one would remain open for both. Shadows that reached out to ensnare seemed to hesitate when they moved as a unit. The forest was adaptive, yes, but perhaps not entirely omniscient. Goldilocks realized that their unity, their bond, had become both a shield and a target. The forest responded to them as a single entity, a combined pulse of life, memory, and instinct. She pressed closer to the smallest bear, feeling its warmth and strength. "We are stronger together," she whispered. "Even if the forest tries to take us, it will find we are not easily separated." The bear's ears twitched. "Yes, but strength has its limits. The forest is patient. It waits, and when it strikes, it will not be gentle." The witch's voice returned, drifting from the shadows above. "Clever," she said, voice soft yet sharp. "Surviving by bond, by instinct, by unity. But cleverness is fragile. Cleverness does not withstand eternity, and the forest has time." Goldilocks' claws flexed in frustration. She wanted to challenge the witch, to strike at the magic that bound them here, but she knew instinctively that brute force was useless. Every step, every thought, every hesitation fed the forest, made it stronger, more aware. They had to outthink it, outlast it, but even that carried the weight of uncertainty. The smallest bear leaned close, voice trembling slightly. "We can prepare, but we cannot predict everything. The forest will always have a surprise, and when it does, we must face it as one. No hesitation, no fear that separates us." Goldilocks nodded. "Together," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The pulse of the forest shifted again, faster now, like the quickening of a predator's heart. The massive tree at the centre seemed to lean closer, roots writhing across the ground, shadows stretching like long fingers toward them. Goldilocks felt the ache in her chest intensify, the cub inside her thrashing, human memories colliding with instinct. The smallest bear mirrored the tension, body coiled, eyes flicking to every shadow, every flicker of light. Suddenly, the red leaves twisted violently, whipping around them, striking with sharp, ember-like heat. Goldilocks pressed close, claws flexing defensively. The forest pulse was now almost violent, a crescendo of judgment, testing, and inevitability. The witch's voice echoed, closer this time, almost within the pulse of their own hearts. "Soon, little creatures," she said, "the moment will arrive, and the forest will claim its due. You may think your bond protects you, but in the end, all attachments must be tested, and when tested, one may fall, and one may vanish entirely. Goldilocks' heart raced. She looked at the smallest bear, whose eyes reflected the same fear and determination. They had survived once, defied the forest's first test, but the final reckoning was approaching, and the forest's patience had limits. They moved carefully through the clearing, seeking patterns, seeking ways to anticipate the forest's judgments. Every shadow, every flicker of red light, every pulse of energy from the massive tree was a signal, a rhythm they learned to read. They discovered that together, synchronized, they could traverse paths that would have closed off to them alone. The forest adapted, but their unity created openings, fragile but real, in the relentless landscape of living magic. Goldilocks pressed her head against the smallest bear's shoulder, drawing strength from the bond that had become their lifeline. "No matter what comes," she whispered, "we are together, and if the forest wants to claim us, it will have to take both." The smallest bear's paw pressed against hers. "Yes, together," it said, "but we must be ready. When it strikes, it may be the end of everything we know." For a time, they moved as one, shadows dancing around them, red leaves brushing against them, the forest's pulse, a constant, living pressure. Every instinct, every memory, every heartbeat was attuned to the rhythm of the living world around them. They were suspended in a delicate balance between fear and unity, survival and inevitability, and they knew that the final moment, the moment when the forest and witch would demand the impossible, was approaching. Goldilocks and the smallest bear were bound together, not just by circumstance, but by choice. Their bond had become a weapon, a shield, and a fragile hope in a world that sought to consume them entirely. And yet, the forest waited, patient, relentless, unforgiving. The forest's pulse grew relentless, a low, omnipresent vibration that filled Goldilocks' bones and hummed through the smallest bear beside her. Every leaf and shadow seemed to shiver in anticipation, as though the very air itself knew the final reckoning was approaching. The red leaves swirled violently, carrying the faint smell of smoke and charred wood, while the blackened trees twisted overhead, their branches forming jagged arches that blocked out any sense of sky or time. Goldilocks pressed close to the smallest bear, drawing strength from the bond that had allowed them to survive the forest's first test. Yet despite this connection, fear gnawed at her chest. The forest had been patient, yes, but its patience was not infinite. The witch's voice lingered in her mind, taunting, melodic and sharp. Soon the moment will come. One must vanish, one must remain, or both will be lost. She clenched her claws, into the molten-like ground beneath them, sparks flaring with each movement, feeling the forest's pulse respond like a predator sensing prey. I don't know if we can survive the next test, she whispered, voice trembling. We've delayed it, yes, but eventually it will strike, and it will not be gentle. The smallest bear's ears flicked nervously. I know, it said softly, voice a mixture of human and animal. But we have something the forest does not fully understand. Unity, bond, choice. If we stand together, we may endure longer than it expects. Goldilocks nodded, pressing her forehead to the bear's shoulder, drawing warmth and reassurance. Memories surged of the small cottage, the porridge, the chairs, the boy who had been transformed into the smallest bear, and her own cub self stolen and warped into a human girl. The forest thrummed with those memories, but for the first time they felt like a weapon, a shield, and a tether to reality amidst the shifting, living nightmare around them. The clearing around them seemed to constrict, the massive tree at the centre pulsing with an intense, almost sentient energy. Its blackened trunk writhed subtly, roots coiling across the ground like serpents, branches stretching overhead like fingers ready to snatch them from existence. The red leaves fell in a swirling storm, hitting them with ember-like burns that lingered, leaving tingling marks of memory and magic across their skin and fur. Goldilocks pressed her claws into the ground, testing it, feeling the tremors and pulses of energy that shifted beneath them. She could sense patterns forming, faint currents that hinted at openings and dangers alike. The forest responded to their movements, adjusting and adapting with an intelligence that was patient, cruel, and relentless. The smallest bear growled softly, a sound that vibrated with primal force, human fear, and animal instinct all at once. It is learning, it murmured. Every step we take, every hesitation we make, it adapts. And when it strikes, we must be ready to act as one, without fear or doubt. Goldilocks' chest ached. She felt the cub within her stirring, instincts clashing with human logic, and the combined weight of past and present threatened to overwhelm her. And if we fail, she whispered, barely audible. If the forest wins, the bear pressed closer, warmth grounding her. Then we face it together, it said firmly, until the very end. The wind shifted suddenly, whipping around them with unnatural speed. Shadows stretched across the clearing, flickering into shapes that resembled long-lost fears, impossible desires, and moments from memory, both human and animal. Goldilocks felt herself shrinking and growing at once, the cub and human girl intertwining, every instinct heightened, every memory a weapon and a burden. Above them, the witch's voice cut sharply through the chaos. The time approaches, little ones, she said, tone laced with cruel amusement. The forest will take what it is owed. You may cling to one another, you may resist, you may attempt defiance, but the inevitable cannot be avoided. One must vanish, one must remain, or both will be consumed. Goldilocks flinched at the sound. The witch had orchestrated this entire ordeal, from the transformation to the cottage, the illusion of safety, and the journey into the forest itself. Every thread of her existence had been manipulated, and yet, despite that, she felt a strange defiance rising within her. She would not allow fear to dictate their fate entirely. The smallest bear's paw brushed against hers, grounding her once more. "We may not control the forest," it whispered, "but we control each other, and in that control, in that bond, there is power, even if it is only for a moment." The forest seemed to quiver in response, branches trembling, roots shifting, shadows flickering violently. Goldilocks and the smallest bear moved cautiously, reading the pulse, feeling currents in the ground, the subtle vibrations that hinted at both opportunity and danger. Every step was a negotiation with the forest itself, a test of awareness, intuition, and the unity that had saved them before. Time became meaningless as they navigated the clearing. The red leaves burned past their skin like fleeting warnings. The shadows whispered incomprehensible words, and the massive tree at the centre seemed to bend subtly toward them, observing, judging, anticipating the final act. Goldilocks pressed close to the smallest bear, inhaling the warmth, feeling the intertwined heartbeats that had become their lifeline. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I cannot imagine it." The bear leaned against her, eyes wide and shimmering with shared fear. "Nor I you," it said, "but the forest does not forgive hesitation forever. When the moment comes, we must act together, or not at all." A sudden surge of wind and pulse erupted from the tree, shaking the clearing violently. Sparks of ember-like light shot across the ground, igniting brief, flickering flames that left scorched patterns on the molten-like earth. Goldilocks and the smallest bear instinctively pressed together, claws flexing, muscles coiling, instincts merging with thought. The forest's voice was no longer just a hum. It became a cacophony of whispers, a symphony of memory, fear, and demand. It pressed against them, trying to fracture their unity, to force hesitation, to make the impossible choice for them. Goldilocks felt herself stretching and twisting between forms, instincts clashing with memory, and the ache in her chest threatened to explode into panic. The witch's voice rose over the din, melodic and cruel. "Soon," she said, "soon the choice will be made. You may cling, you may resist, but the forest will take what it desires, and when it does, one will vanish, and one will remain, or perhaps both will be lost to the night. Goldilocks' claws dug into the ground. She would not let fear dictate her actions. The bond between them, forged through trials and terror, was now their only weapon, and she clung to it desperately. The red leaves swirled violently, shadows stretched and coalesced, and the massive tree seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that synchronized with their own. Goldilocks realized that the forest was no longer just testing them. It was preparing to act. The final moment, the moment where the impossible choice would be forced, was almost upon them. The smallest bear's voice was steady, though tremors of fear ran beneath it. We face it together. Whatever comes, we face it as one. Goldilocks nodded, pressing closer. Together, she said. No matter what the forest decides, we remain united. A sudden pulse erupted from the tree, and the clearing became a whirlwind of red leaves, ember-like sparks, and shadows that seemed alive. Goldilocks and the smallest bear clutched each other tightly, heartbeats synchronizing, breath mingling, instincts and memory merging. They had faced the impossible before, survived by unity, and now, in the face of the final reckoning, they were ready, or as ready as they could ever be. The forest waited, patient and relentless. The witch watched, calculating and cruel, and Goldilocks and the smallest bear, bound together by bond, memory and choice, braced for the moment that would decide their fates, once and for all. For what felt like hours, or perhaps days, time lost its meaning in the living nightmare. They had prepared, adapted, and unified. Yet even as they read the patterns, anticipated the surges of magic and movement, the forest had always retained a will of its own, patient and cruel. And now, as the red leaves whipped around them like fiery serpents, and the shadows twisted into shapes of fear and memory, Goldilocks understood there would be no more delays. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The smallest bear's voice was low and steady, a tether in the whirlwind. "This is it," it whispered. "No hesitation, no fear. Together, or nothing." Goldilocks nodded, pressing her forehead against its shoulder. "Together," she echoed. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The forest responded immediately. The ground trembled beneath them, roots writhing like serpents, blackened branches arching closer, and shadows coalescing into shapes that reflected every fear, every memory, every regret. Goldilocks felt her human and cub forms twisting and merging, instincts clashing with thought, memories colliding with raw sensation. The forest did not merely judge, they were under its scrutiny in every way, and it was merciless. The witch's voice, melodic and sharp, cut through the chaos. "The choice is no longer yours," she said, a note of cruel satisfaction threading through the words. The forest will decide, one shall remain, one shall vanish, or perhaps, in your defiance, both shall be consumed. Goldilocks' chest tightened. The ache inside her felt like a living thing, a twisting, clawing, impossibly sharp weight. The smallest bear pressed close, paw against her chest, grounding her. We face it together, it said once more. Even if the forest takes us both, we face it together. Then the forest moved. The massive tree's roots erupted from the earth, curling around them like constricting serpents, while shadows stretched with impossible lengths, coiling and twisting toward the clearing centre. The red leaves stung with ember light, leaving tiny burns that throbbed like tiny pulses of memory across their skin and fur. Goldilocks felt herself stretching between forms, human and bear, past and present, instincts and memories all colliding. She could sense the smallest bear doing the same, a mirrored reflection of terror, determination, and unyielding bond. They tried to hold on, to resist, to cling to each other and to themselves, to the memory of what they had been and what they had become. But the forest, alive, patient, and unyielding, began to consume, not with malice, but with inevitability. The red leaves swirled faster, forming a vortex of ember and shadow that lifted them slightly off the ground. The massive tree loomed, blackened trunk coiling, its pulse sinking with their heartbeats, as if aware of their bond and deliberately attempting to test its limits. Goldilocks clutched the smallest bear tightly. "No, we can't. Not like this." Her voice cracked, blending human fear with animal instinct. "We're together." The forest responded with a pulse so intense it shook the ground beneath them violently. The clearing contracted, the shadows became denser, and the red leaves ignited briefly, flaring like living embers that licked at their skin. They held each other, trembling, claws flexing, muscles coiled, breath ragged. The witch's voice, now almost a whisper, carried through the tumult like a blade. "Defiance is beautiful until it is not." And then, with a force that could not be resisted, the forest acted. The roots coiled tighter, branches arched downward like fingers ready to snatch. Shadows enveloped them fully, and the vortex of red leaves surged violently. Goldilocks felt herself ripped between forms, between past and present, human and bear, memory and instinct. The smallest bear mirrored the struggle, pressing close, paws clutching, body trembling, and in the instant that their unity was absolute, when neither hesitation nor fear separated them, the forest claimed them. Not one, not the other, but both. The vortex swallowed them whole, a conflagration of red leaves, shadow, and pulsing magic. Goldilocks felt a strange detachment, as her body, instincts, and memories were absorbed into the forest's will. She reached out, claws slicing through air that no longer existed, eyes locking on the smallest bear, heart merging with his in the final beat of unity. And then nothing. The clearing stilled, the red leaves fell gently to the ground, as if nothing had occurred, the shadows receding into the twisted trees, the massive trunk returning to its slow, steady pulse. The forest was silent, patient, unyielding, and yet the memory of Goldilocks and the smallest bear remained, not as living forms, not as creatures of flesh and bone, but as pulses of essence within the forest, intertwined, inseparable, echoing through roots, leaves and shadow. The witch stepped forward from the canopy, her expression one of thinly veiled curiosity. "Interesting," she murmured. "They tried to defy, to survive together, and in the end they became part of the forest itself, a lesson for those who think unity can withstand inevitability, and yet perhaps a spark remains." The clearing was quiet, the embers faded, leaving a calm, almost serene darkness. The forest held within it the echoes of two beings who had defied the rules, who had refused to choose, and who had vanished as a result, not lost entirely, but transformed, absorbed, becoming something new, something neither entirely human nor entirely animal. In the following days, those who ventured into the forest sometimes whispered of strange pulses of warmth beneath the soil, of red leaves that flickered like embers, even without wind, of shadows that seemed almost sentient, and some, just at the edge of perception, claimed to hear laughter, a mixture of human joy and bear-like growl woven into the wind. The cottage, abandoned, slowly decayed. The witch, patient as ever, waited. She had orchestrated the transformation, the choice, the impossible test, and she had been victorious in the terms she had set. Yet somewhere in the forest, the essence of Goldilocks and the smallest bear pulsed, intertwined, a bond that the forest had attempted to consume but could never fully erase. And so the story ended, not with victory, not with defeat, but with the eerie persistence of unity, the haunting echo of defiance, and the dark truth of the forest. It takes, it tests, it consumes, but it can never fully destroy what is joined in heart, memory, and choice. The forest waits still, patient and unyielding, for the next traveller foolish enough to enter, for the next story, for the next impossible choice.